Hello and welcome. My name is Brian Caplen. I'm editor of The Banker. I'm here with Philip Alexander, who's senior editor of The Banker. And we're just coming up to the publication of the top 1,000 for 2014. It's coming out in the July issue of The Banker. Philip's always a time of great anticipation. All the banks are out there thinking about where they're going to be in the ranking. Now, we're not at liberty to reveal any kind of individual spots at the moment, but you've had a chance to get a look at the first cut of the figures. I mean, what are the sorts of things, the general trends that we're starting to pick up for this year's ranking?
Well, I think there's one trend that's a continuity and one, if you like, that's a change. The continuity is China's still going through a growth phase. Obviously, we heard a lot at the start of 2014 about some events happening in the shadow banking sector and the possibility of defaults. But of course, the top 1,000 is based on the numbers from the end of 2013. And certainly last year, Chinese banks are still doing well. So that trend is still very much in place. And we'll have to wait till next year to see whether that changes. The trend that's very much changed is that there are signs of recovery in Europe. The results there are still nowhere near as good as they were pre-crisis. But certainly it's the share of Europe in global profits has increased significantly. Certain of the most crisis-hit countries, including Spain and Greece, have recovered quite strongly. However, there are still some worrying signs. Italian banks still struggling, and Slovenia, which was a sort of late arrival on the Eurozone crisis scene, is still getting worse. So Europe's certainly not out of the woods, but some signs of improvement there.
Okay, let's go back to China first of all. And it's interesting because I was looking recently at the ranking going back right to 1970 when we started it. And you do see, movements of countries' banks going up the ranking and going out. So if you go back to 1970, it's very much an American list with a lot of names that, have disappeared, like Chemical Bank and Manufacturers Hanover. Then you move on to 1980, you've got very much a sort of French and German list, and 1990 is a Japanese list. So when we start to talk about, having a strong presence of the Chinese banks, I think it's fair to say it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be that way forever, and it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is rosy in the Chinese garden. As you said, I mean, there are stresses and strains in the Chinese banking system, but they haven't yet shown up in the results. So, I mean, do we expect China to be in an equivalent position or a stronger position in 10 years' time?
Well, I think that's right, and one of the sort of warning signs to look for is always, how fast is the financial sector growing compared with the economy. China is still one of the fastest growing economies in the world, but the growth rates have come right down from being in double figures before. The banking sector is still growing, has still been growing at sort of 20% plus rates. That doesn't look sustainable. It doesn't mean the banking sector is going to go over a cliff and have a huge crash, but you would expect that the rates of credit growth that we've seen in China will have to slow down.
Okay, and not every other emerging market is doing quite so well, are they? So what's the kind of readings we're getting on some of the other countries?
That's right. Well, there have been a number of slowdowns, a number of countries where asset quality's got a bit worse. Another big factor this year has been what's happening with currency markets. All of our rankings are compiled in dollars, which means where banks report in their local currency, if the local currency is sold off, that affects their position in the top 1,000 ranking. All
right, on that one you could argue that it's not so much that they're out of place this year, they were more out of place last year when the currencies were slightly overvalued. And just finally on the Eurozone, so you said, it's been a very bad year for Italy, but we're seeing some recovery in places like Spain, which is positive. I mean, I think they've had quite a big turnaround, is that right?
That's right. They're actually, as a sector, Spain is back in profit this year after some quite big losses in recent years. It's very much the case that where we saw banks recognise losses quite early in the crisis, they have recovered. So Greece and Spain, obviously Greece went through the sovereign restructuring there, and now they're very much on the mend. There's been a big consolidation there. The same with Spain. The countries that recognise losses a little bit later or recognise the depth of the problems later are still struggling on and still need perhaps some consolidation in the sector.
Okay, Philip, thanks very much for giving us a little bit of an insight there. You'll be writing the cover stories, so we'll wait to see exactly how everybody does in July, and we'll have analysis on all the tables and the rankings then. So make sure you pre-order your copy now.